Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, first, thank you for allowing me to come in and speak. I haven't seen many of you for a few months. Many of you I see all the time. Some of you I see more often than I'd like. My name is Jack Martin, and I am the former mayor of Mineola. I am the current senator from the 7th Senatorial District, representing not only this area, but from the city line east to Hicksville, and from, I guess, the Long Island Sound, Great Neck, Port Washington, through Manhasset, Roslyn, right down through Westbury, Mineola, through Floral Park, down through Almont, Stewart Manor, Franklin Square. So it's a rather large part of Nassau County, about 312,000 people, and 85,000 plus voted in my election, and I won by
400 votes.
451 votes. So, thank you, because if it weren't for the efforts of this group and others, I would not have been elected, and the state Senate would not be in Republican hands. And let me explain to you what it means to have a state Senate in Republican hands. For those of you who may not know, we did pass a budget already this year, which was quite an accomplishment. The state constitution says that we have to have a budget in place by April 1st. And the last time they actually did that was 20 years ago. So much for a state constitutional requirement. Last year they didn't even pass a budget. The governor actually had to pass the budget piecemeal through continuing resolutions that forced the legislature out of a threat of shutting down the government to pass pieces of the budget. This year we were able to pass the budget. We had a $10 billion deficit that we had to bridge, and we had a commitment that we had made to you during the election that we would not raise taxes or fees in the middle of the worst recession in 80 years. And true to our commitment, we passed a budget that did not raise taxes and fees, and to that end I need to compliment the governor, because he also was true to his word, and he kept his commitment that we would not raise taxes and fees. And with the governor and with the Senate, we were able to hold the assembly back, which is important. You know, we sometimes lose sight of how important one election may be, but again, I want to reinforce how important it was that we were able to get the majority in the New York State Senate. And if we want to analogize, you know, we had a tremendous victory, the Republican Party did, and I think the conservative movement did, in Washington this past year, by electing as many Republicans as we did in the House. But unfortunately, we were not able to make that same difference in the U.S. Senate. And if we had elected a few more Republican senators, like David Malpass, if we had had that ability to do that, a lot of the things that we're just barely scratching the surface on right now, we would have been able to do, and I think we would have been a little more successful than we perhaps have been to this point, because there is some pushback there, not only from the executive, but from one of the legislative branches. So let's understand that although we haven't done much federally, because of that, if there had not been that effort to elect Republican members to the House of Representatives, just think of how far they would have overreached beyond where we are right now, and how much worse we would be as a country. Now let's talk about New York State. We passed the budget, we balanced the budget, and there were some issues. I know all of you received either a robocall, a mailer at home, or multiple mailers at home, and I'm sure all of you, or most of you, heard those TV commercials and those ads on the radio saying that we had to pass a millionaire's tax. Okay, we'll come back and we'll talk about that. If anyone has any questions as to why I refuse to sign on to increasing taxes, I'll be happy to have that discussion as well. But I think New York State does not have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. Okay, we spend, last year we spent $142 billion. We brought in $132 billion. That's why we have a $10 billion deficit. We need to reduce our spending. We need to have a commitment to fiscal conservatism before we can go out there and decide we're going to tax people. And certainly, from my point of view, when you're looking at people that are earning $200,000 a year, or families earning $300,000 a year, who are we talking about?
Small businesses.
We're talking about small businesses. And if we're going to get out of this recession, and if we're going to give people incentives to hire people and put people back to work, the last person we should be targeting is a small business owner and hitting them with an additional tax. So that was the budget. The governor, again, made a great deal about passing a tax cap during the campaign. We all heard him. A lot of us did the same thing. So his first proposal was a tax cap, which he sent to the New York State Senate and he sent to the Assembly. The Senate, we passed it. Let me take a step back. I am the chair of the Local Governments Committee in the New York State Senate. I sit on the Labor Committee, the Insurance Committee, the Civil Service and Pensions Committee, the Social Services Committee, and on the Corporations and Authorities Committee. As the chair of local governments, I had an opportunity with Senator Flanagan, who chairs the Education Committee, to work with the governor in terms of the tax cap. Okay? And we were committed to not only having a tax cap, but having a tax cap with no loopholes, no exceptions. The governor proposed it, we passed it, the Assembly's still sitting on it. So when you read certain things, and I'm going to refer to certain articles that I've read recently in the New York Post from a gentleman by the name of Dicker, you may have heard of him, where he says that we're looking to water down the tax cap. Here's the reality. We passed it. We passed it in the way that the governor gave it to us. The governor proposed it. We have it. We've passed it. The Assembly's sitting on it. The sponsor in the Assembly is Shelley Silver, the Speaker of the Assembly. And usually, if a person wants to have his or her bill presented to the floor, they talk to either the majority leader in the Senate or to the Speaker of the Assembly and ask them if they would please move their bill to the floor because they want to have a vote. So, if we want to have a vote on a tax cap in the Assembly, perhaps the Speaker of the Assembly or the sponsor of the bill could speak to the Speaker of the Assembly, and as my dear friend Senator DeFrancisco said, as he's shaving in the morning, he can look himself in the mirror and say, would you please put my bill on the floor and allow a vote on it? And when somebody talks to us about renegotiating the terms of a tax cap, what are we negotiating? The governor's in favor of it, the Senate's already passed it, and the Speaker of the Assembly has already said he'll sponsor it and is the sponsor. So who's negotiating what? So we're committed to it. What I have sensed recently is that the governor has begun taking a few steps back. So not only do I agree with you, and I'm glad to see you going there on May 10th, and I'll be there in the well with you. But not only do you see a need to put pressure on the Assembly to move the process forward, you also have to see that the governor has begun taking a couple of steps back. And let's make sure that the Assembly passes a bill, and if the Assembly passes the governor's bill, as the Senate has already done, then the governor really will have no option but to sign his own bill. Let's talk about mandate relief for a second. Because when we passed the tax cap back in February, one of the things we committed to was real mandate relief. Now when we consider all of the cuts, and there was a lot that was made of cuts to different programs during this last budget cycle. Cuts to education, cuts to Medicaid, the two largest programs by far in the state budget. Let's contextualize education first. Does anyone know what the average loss was for our school districts here in the area as a percentage of their overall budget? close to zero, less than 1%. The extreme example was up in Great Neck. Great Neck has a $170 million budget, of which it receives a couple of $1 million in state aid. I think the year-to-year loss in aid for the Great Neck School District was less than $10,000 in a $170 million budget. So when you hear that the cuts to state aid are going to devastate our school districts and we're going to lay off teachers and cut programs, it has nothing to do with the lack or the loss of state aid. Does anyone have an idea what the cost drivers are that are affecting not only our school districts? Anita, I'm not picking you yet. Not only our school districts, but our local governments, our counties, our towns, our villages, and our school districts. What are the two significant cost drivers?
Pensions and medical.
Pensions and health care. Okay? And that's where our struggle begins and ends when it comes to the New York State budget. If you consider the cost year to year to our pension system, when I was mayor of Mineola, when we were dealing with our budget, we received an estimate from the comptroller's office that showed that there were projections going forward 6-7 years that showed 30% increases year to year in pension contributions, not directly as a result of the economy and its current state, but because of that original downturn in the economy and in the markets and the way that the pension fund was invested would require an infusion of cash into the fund that required us to pay this money going out 6 or 7 years, regardless of whether the economy began to come back or not. Think about that for a second. If you have 30% increases year to year, and for our village, it amounted to approximately 2.5% to 3% of our tax levy year to year, just to make up for the increases in pension costs year to year. Let me let you know on a few items. One, state pension system is constitutionally protected in New York State. You can't go back and take away or tinker with it without a constitutional amendment. So that restricts somewhat our ability to deal with things real time. We can pass another tier, we can go from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan, but it is not going to affect our short-term goals, which is providing tax relief for people who are struggling to make ends meet today, not 20 years down the road. So that's our challenge for the legislature right now, is how do we deal with the realities of where we are today. So yes, adding another tier would provide some relief. Remember, we passed Tier 5 last year. The state passed a pension tier last year that requires certain contributions to the pension system. It changed certain dynamics with regard to pensions. And if we take it another step and pass another pension tier this year, the jury's still out, folks. But the immediate effects of doing that are pretty close to zero. Okay? We need immediate relief now when it comes to that. We need relief with regard to health care. Back in 2000, the state legislature at the time and the comptroller at the time, a guy by the name of McCall, you remember him? Yeah. Guy who wanted to run for governor, decided that wouldn't it be a great idea if we were to do away with our public employees' requirement to pay into the pension system. There are two groups that pay into a pension traditionally, the employee and the employer. And the employer passes that on to the taxpayer in a public pension system. If you do not require the employee to contribute to the state pension system because things at the time were pretty good, who's left holding the bag in the event that the economy tanks like it has and you have to make up the difference in contributions to the state pension system?
Taxpayer.
The employer and the taxpayer. Exactly. And that's the position we're in right now. Since the decision was made 11 years ago no longer to require employees to contribute to their own pensions, we have a rather unfortunate situation where we have taxpayers who our homeowners, usually property taxpayers, through villages, towns, counties, school districts, are meeting their pension obligations for the public employees who are paying as part of their property taxes into a pension system where they themselves may not have the benefit of a pension themselves.
That's right.
And if you want to, I would invite you to go and look at your tax bill and figure how much of your tax bill is going directly towards pensions. I think you'll be scared of how much you actually are paying for that. Healthcare is the other issue. Skyrocketing costs. We have to come up with alternatives as to how we deal with healthcare and provide different programs, perhaps flexibility on healthcare so that we can offset the increasing costs that come along with skyrocketing healthcare costs. I will tell you this, our school districts right now, every one of them on Long Island, to their credit, has employee contributions to healthcare. It's not the same for our local governments, but every one of the school districts on Long Island has contributions to healthcare, which is a step in the right direction. But we do have to come up with a different model on how we conduct ourselves, because this model doesn't work.
It's broken.
I don't need to tell you that, but consider this. If this process goes forward without some form of relief, local governments will get to a point where they will no longer provide basic services, but they will collect taxes for the purposes of paying health care and pension costs. And if you cap it at 2%, and again, I've already voted for a tax cap, but I want everyone to understand, if you cap it at 2% and you don't provide the mandate relief that's necessary to go along with that, that means that as expenses go up beyond that 2%, local governments are going to have to cut basic services in order to make and meet their obligations with regard to pensions and health care. And that is the reality that faces New York State today. I have introduced bills in the New York State Senate to require, in the event of mandatory arbitration, to require the arbitrator to have to take into consideration as his primary, or one of his primary considerations, the impact to the local taxpayer in the event that there's an award. That's not a requirement right now. We have bills in that would require public employees to contribute to a non-wage compensation fund. Not just for pensions directly, which we couldn't do because it's constitutionally prohibited, but to pay a portion of their salaries to a non-wage compensation fund from which the local municipality would then have the opportunity to take that money and distribute it to either health care, pension costs, or any other non-wage compensation that is part of their compensation package for their employees. There are ways that we need to address this, but what Anita's doing this week, or next week, is important. We need to hear from you. We need to hear from you, and we need you to understand what we are facing there, because I'll tell you, I have met with the teachers union half a dozen times in the last 3 or 4 months. I have met with all public employee unions who are up there and take the opportunity to stop in and to remind us of how many people they have who are employed in our districts. But ultimately, it depends on you. We need to hear from you as well. And we need you to reinforce some of that message. So, when they were kicking me around during the budget because I wouldn't vote for a millionaire's tax, by the way, people making more than $200,000, you need to understand what that means. And although they're going to portray it that we're abandoning our children and cutting education, and that we're abandoning our seniors and cutting Medicaid, and that we are, turning our backs on our local communities, the reality is, and unfortunately, or fortunately, the reality is, they've got the funds to be able to do that and skew the message any way they want. Take the time to stay informed as to what the realities are. And as I told people, and I probably made 20 to 30 phone calls every day during that budget process as people were calling me to ask me what the hell I was thinking, voting for millionaires ahead of our children and seniors. And I would explain to them, if I were doing what they're claiming I'm doing, you wouldn't receive it in a flyer paid by somebody in the mail, it would be on the front page of Newsday, and you'd get to read it as real news. So read everything with a grain of salt. Okay? We are committed to keeping and holding the line on spending in New York State, not increasing taxes or fees. We are committed to creating jobs and giving incentives to local small businesses so that we can get our economy moving again. And it's going to be tough. We know that. But the economy doesn't start coming back by government spending more money. It comes back by government getting out of the way and giving you the opportunity to reinvest your own money. And we get it. Now, you mentioned the MTA payroll tax, the scourge of downstate New York. We all understand, we know what the MTA payroll tax is. We've all been through it. The unfortunate reality is, and I've said this many times before, some of you have heard me say this, I would not have voted for an MTA payroll tax, and if I were there instead of my predecessor, or if Lee Zeldin was there instead of Brian Foley, that MTA payroll tax would never have gone into place to begin with. Okay? So there's your benefit of having a New York State Senate with a Republican majority. But right now, the MTA payroll tax is there. It is a $1.4 billion infusion of money into the MTA, and the consequence right now of removing the MTA payroll tax altogether will leave a will leave a $1.4 billion hole in the MTA's budget. Let me just finish, please. And so, if anyone is committed to getting rid of it, it is us, myself included. I have met with the MTA, I have met with my colleagues, I have met with our own analysts in Albany, and what I will not do is create a vacuum where they will use that as a means of cutting service for our communities here on Long Island, cutting back rail service, cutting back bus service, and increasingly increase. Let me, finish. I'll answer whatever questions you want. I will. But we have to do it realistically. I wouldn't have voted for it. But to tell you that I'm going to vote, get rid of $1.4 billion of funding for the MTA, when we have communities, all of our communities, whether it's Great Neck, Port Washington, Manhasset, Mineola, Westbury, Carl Place, Floral Park, that rely on mass transit to get to work, we have to understand that there have to be alternate revenue streams as well. I will be at the hearings that were mentioned earlier tomorrow having to do with the MTA. I was there and I had conversations with Jay Walder with regard to how he operates the MTA, and I'm calling for a full accounting and a forensic accounting of the MTA. Okay? We're working on it. Okay? There are various bills that are up there right now. Oh, I'll call you first. Don't worry about it. There are various bills that are sitting in Albany right now. Some of them from other senators. Lee's got one. John Bonasek's got one that will phase out the MTA payroll tax over a number of years, or will require tolling East River crossings and allow for communities outside of New York City to be exempt and require New York City to pay the payroll tax and tax East River crossings. There are a number of different plans that are there. But we will continue to move that process forward as well. So I'm going to end it here because I know we're going to have a few questions. I promised you that I would call on you first, and I will.
I just want to hit a couple points. First of all, I have in my hands the consolidated balance sheet of MTA. Oh, they'll be up against these things. This shows $56.4 billion worth of assets that MTA has. Much of it is liquidated cash. Much of it is unrestricted. That should have been hit first. I don't know what they're doing sitting on real estate properties and they come after our business communities. This is a time when our local business communities, our 12 lower counties cannot afford this. It's outrageous. East River crossings, we're going to put tolls now on East River crossings.
No way.
We're going to put that.
No way.
I just want to say one more thing and then let you go. We're aware that you didn't vote for this. We understand that. Well, a lot of us in this room worked very hard at getting you and Lee in place. And the big platform was the MTA payroll tax. You guys are going to take care of that. And I understand you're going to work on it. But now I'm hearing from you, maybe not so much. My concern is this. We're not looking to dissolve the MTA. We are well aware that people need trains and buses and subways. I rode them yesterday. We need them. We know that. But we have very serious recommendations that you need to consider. I suggest you listen to Bill Schoolman's presentation. Most of the people in this room have heard that. And I would challenge you.
I've heard it twice.
Then you should know the
He's
statistics.
on my cell phone. I can speak to him in a
then
moment.
You should know the statistics and you should know the facts. Jay Walter's not giving you the truth. As we'll find out tomorrow, because I'm going to bring those in with me as well. But no one's suggesting that we dismantle the MTA. What we're suggesting is that we privatize it and bring it down to a level where it's manageable. It is out of control. The abuses of the MTA we have listed over and over on our website, and it's outrageous that our senators and our assembly continue to allow it to go on.
Let me answer. I don't disagree with you. I don't agree with the way that the MTA conducts itself. I am not, and I have not backpedaled on anything that I committed to. But understand, one of the things that I've learned, and again, I would hope that everyone here will also understand, is that there is a process there. To hold Lee Zeldin accountable for not repealing the MTA payroll tax, when he's working pretty hard at doing that, I have sat with him for countless hours and I've seen the effort he's put into it, but I do hear that there are people who are now criticizing him for the MTA payroll tax not having been repealed is unfair. I know how hard he is working to do that, and I know how hard others are as well, but we have to, if it were up to us, I can tell you this without equivocation, if it were up to us, we would have snapped our fingers and done it already. Unfortunately, as I think you understand, as frustrated as you are, you understand that it doesn't just take us to do that. We have to go up there, build a consensus on what that model is going to be, and at the same time, that's why we're holding this hearing tomorrow. This hearing tomorrow didn't occur by accident. It is going forward tomorrow so that we can have a forum within which we can have the president of the MTA show up and explain his business model.
He doesn't shut, to say a word. He just sits there with his mouth shut, Jack. Be honest now.
I'm always honest.
No, I'm talking about the MTA
let me make my point. Jay Walter is going to be standing before the Senate Committee on Government Operations and Investigations. They will be asking him questions. He doesn't have the option as he has during. Let me finish.
Let him
finish. We can only have.
They can't have a dialogue. We're here to hear Jack.
Well, first of all, excuse me, sir. Excuse me.
Jack, you know me.
Excuse me, I do, but it's not. Let's keep it on a certain level.
Yeah. We're on
Okay?
the same side.
Yes. When it comes to asking questions of the MTA, there are answers that they absolutely have to answer for. And as you mentioned, yeah, I have listened to Bill's presentation twice. I've been out to his office. I've met with him. I've met with his attorney as well. So yeah, no, I do understand where that is. But I also understand that if we're going to change the dynamic that is the MTA, we also have to go through this process as well. Yes.
I'd like to calm the waters a little bit and get off the subject of taxes, the economy, and so on. I want to know how you're going to vote on the same-sex marriage. Because if you read the paper, today's paper, the governor, mayor, everybody, it's a done deal. What are you going to do about it?
Let me be clear, unequivocal. I believe in traditional marriage. Okay. have met with every group, literally every group under the sun, here in the district and up in Albany. And I will continue to meet with them. I think that's my responsibility. If I've got people from the district who want to come in and sit with me and talk to me about it, I'll be happy to. I believe in traditional
And
methods.
what is your feeling about the vote? Do you think that the Republican Senate will oppose it or approve it?
I don't know that there is a consensus on either side of the aisle as to how they're going to vote.
I'm not interested in the assembly.
Oh, no, I mean in the Senate, on either side. I think there are going to be senators, Democrat senators who are going to vote against it. I think there are going to be Republican senators that are going to vote for it. And the question's going to be, and I can't answer because I don't know, how many on either side. I don't know.
We have to cut it off. We have to leave the last half an hour for the last speaker.
She has to, go ahead. Would you?
One last one, go ahead.
MTA, that's something.
I'll be back there to answer your question personally.
Okay, MTA is something on again. Only 12 counties in the state of New York have to pay it. Every church, every school, every non-taxable organization pays. Wait a minute, Jack. And they already are taken away from Nassau County, the buses. That we owe money? Not fair. If they're going to tax for MTA, the whole state should be responsible. Why should we in Nassau County pay for service that we're not getting? And it's not right, and that was my big thing with Craig Johnson, was the MTA tax, 37 cents on every $100 that they have to pay. Our school district is paying over $250,000 of my tax money to for MTA. I don't use the MTA. And I don't think hardly anybody in here, we all have cars.
I don't use the MTA.
I never use it.
I don't use the MTA, and we're paying it as well. Let me just give you a quick overview. State Senate this year, as part of our budget, our bill, excluded schools from MTA payroll tax. When we went to the table, I'm telling you that we excluded schools as a basically unfair item. We should not have, and they should never have included schools or anyone else. No one should be paying the tax. I understand that. Our not-for-profits shouldn't be paying it. I get it. It's the tax that you keep on paying from the moment you get up in the morning, the moment you turn on your lights, the moment you turn on your TV, the moment you get in your car, the moment you drive to wherever you're going. Whatever you do during the day, you are continuously paying the MTA payroll tax to whomever happens to be servicing you. I get it. I do. I am as committed as anyone else to making sure that we have the ability to take it back. I need to do it, and I would ask you to give those of us who are working on it the ability to try to do it in a responsible way. I understand, and you're absolutely right. Did everyone hear the point? I'm sorry, I didn't get your first name.
Yeah, my concern is that you guys have the attitude that this needs to be, if you take this money out, it's got to be stuffed in with something else. No, it doesn't. They have assets, and they need to be self-sustaining.
It doesn't necessarily have to be. It doesn't necessarily have to be done that way.
Authorities are required by New York State law to be self-sustaining. Required by law to be self-sustaining. They are not self-sustaining.
What Karen said was that the MTA has billions of dollars worth of assets, real estate assets, some of it is liquid. And why would we have a public authority in New York State that has real estate holdings and is a landlord owning buildings in New York City collecting rent? It's an absolutely valid point. You're absolutely right. And that's part of our discussions and should be part of that hearing tomorrow as well.
I'm sort of caught here. This is such an exciting thing, but it's 25-2. We must be out of the building ending at 9 o'clock. We still have the third speaker. I don't really think it's fair to him. So what do we do?
I'll sit around afterwards if anyone wants to.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.